My name is David Voelker, and I'm a professor of humanities and history, and I am also the faculty advisor for the environmental humanities track in the humanities minor. And I'm really excited you're here today. Grateful to all of the speakers who signed up today. I literally conceived of this idea just about, at the beginning of last week, and put out a call for participants, and within 36 hours I had a dozen people to present. So it's going to be somewhat fast-paced as we have 15-minute presentations. I'm already down to about 12 minutes for myself. So we'll see how that goes. I'm literally soaked in fog from my bike ride over here this morning. So if you're wondering, is he really nervous? Yes. And I enjoyed a very foggy bike ride this morning. So that's what's going on with that. So I would actually just like to note part of the inspiration behind this event. I was reading a bit about the climate strike, the global climate strike, which begins today, and particularly this call that went out back in May that the young activists for Fridays for Future put out this statement calling for the climate strike. And this really hit me, that their sense was the adults are not going to do what needs to be done. The adults have been failing to do what needs to be done, to take meaningful action, not only for a few months or a few years, but literally for decades. And as an adult, and as a parent, and as a person who has led a very privileged life, that just really hit me and reminded me that it's really important to stand in, not only to stand in solidarity with these young activists, but also to really push for meaningful action. And I'm hoping this event this morning can provide some additional inspiration for that. So that's kind of where the idea for the event came from, is really the young people saying, wake up. I would like to speak for a few minutes here after we do the Java update. Now we'll put that off. More important things to do. I'd like to speak for a few minutes about what it means to conceive of climate change not as an environmental problem, but as a human problem. And I'm going to have to look at my notes here. I want to say first, I don't mean that this is a problem for humans alone. In other words, that we only need to be concerned about human suffering and human loss, because clearly climate change is threatening the web of life that we are a part of. And so I'm absolutely not saying that. And I also want us to consider not only the effects of climate change, so we could think about warmer temperatures, more powerful storms, the melting glaciers and so forth, but also the underlying causes of climate change. If we're going to talk about climate change, we need to think about it holistically. Not just about the effects, not just about the symptoms, but the underlying causes. And that's part of what I mean when I say climate change is a human problem, not an environmental problem. I think that the separation of humans from nature is a failed idea. The notion that the environment is out there, there's a problem out there that needs to be fixed. It suggests that we can just change some things out there and the problem will be solved. A little pause so you can think. That wasn't meant for dramatic effect, but I also want to say that when I say it's a human problem, I don't mean that humans being humans are necessarily going to destroy the planet. I mean, there are people who say that, well, this is what humans do. This is who we are. This is our fate, essentially, to destroy life on this planet, and perhaps to go somewhere else, to another planet, or somewhere else in our solar system, or even outside of our solar system. And I don't think that's the case. I mean, we have hundreds of thousands of years of history. We usually call that prehistory, but our deep time ancestors lived on this planet without destroying life. without threatening the web of life in a serious way. So I'm not saying humans being humans are going to destroy the planet. So I want to get back to the question, what's it mean that climate change is not just an environmental problem, but a human problem? If we think of climate change solely as an environmental problem, we're defining the problem as something that is outside of ourselves. It's out there. We can change light bulbs. We can drive more efficient cars, and so on, and imagine the problem has been solved. And I think those changes are essential. I want to be clear about that. I think the Trump administration's concerted effort to bring to a screeching halt any of the regulations that could help us address climate change, I think that those policies are criminal. I don't necessarily mean that in a statutory sense, but perhaps, but rather in a larger moral sense. It's been quite stunning to see the Trump administration use every tool at its disposal to try to stop car manufacturers from producing more fuel-efficient vehicles. It's really hard to imagine a more cynical policy than that. And it reflects not only a denial of the reality of climate change, but a refusal to value anything other than profit or power over. Even if we had those more fuel-efficient vehicles, though, I don't think that would be enough to save us or to save this living planet if we don't dive deeper into the problem. So as a thought experiment, consider that, or imagine that tomorrow scientists announce that they have developed a clean and unlimited source of energy and some sort of storage method for that that's also clean and readily available, easy to use. And they say that we can deploy an entirely new energy system in the next decade and really become truly carbon neutral. And of course, there would be lots of investors, lots of people interested in this, pouring money into it. Imagine that were possible, and that we would no longer be releasing all of this carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. What would happen next? In some ways that would seem like a miracle in the face of the climate change crisis. But I would like to consider whether that would really solve the deeper problem, this deeper human problem that we are and have been destroying the web of life on this planet. I think we would continue to experience the effects of climate change for many decades, even if we halted the emission of those greenhouse gases now. And it's possible that ultimately that would be a self-defeating victory, that we would have this idea that we had solved the problem, but that really we had not gone deep enough. We had continued living essentially the way we had lived, just with cleaner energy. Yesterday, there was an article in the journal Science that indicated the bird population in the US and Canada had declined by almost 30% in the last 50 years. This is nearly 3 billion birds, and the population size had decreased by nearly 3 billion. And that rate of decline has been accelerating, and we can see very similar trends for other wildlife and insects as well. So what does it mean to say that climate change is not just an environmental problem, but a human problem? It's not enough to grapple with climate change as an environmental problem, as a problem that's out there. We have to change ourselves. We have to change our stories about what it means to be human. As many others have argued, Thomas Berry, Joanna Macy, Charles Eisenstein, many people have made this argument before. We have to change our stories, what it means to be human. To accomplish this transformation, we'll need to see the world with new eyes and also with ancient eyes. We will need to delve deeply into the human experience. We'll have to turn to that central question of the humanities. What does it mean to be human? we'll have to turn that back into a living question, not just a question about the past. To preserve the web of life, we will have to untangle the web of domination. That's the web not only of domination of humans over nature, but humans over each other. Thank you.